Well, I'm trained as a philosopher, but also as a neuroscientist. And the work that I do has to do with the interface between neuroscience and philosophy. So my main interest is in addressing those large-scale philosophical questions about consciousness or the nature of the self or the nature of morality, and seeing what it is that neuroscience can tell us from a biological perspective about those things. My current work really focuses on morality in particular, because what I want to understand is how it is that social mammals, not just humans, but also chimpanzees and marmosets and others, enjoy a social life, come to care about each other, help each other, and so forth. We don't know what it would be to know everything. I think there are many very deep mysteries still about the nature of the functioning of the brain, many large-scale questions about its organization that have not yet been answered. So it's a very difficult thing to know sort of how far away real knowledge of the nervous system is. But I think we can say that we are still very much in the early stages of understanding. We're beginning to realize that there are very deep similarities in brain organization between very simple invertebrates, like a fruit fly, and the mammalian brain, the rat brain or the human brain. But exactly the nature of those organizational principles, we're still not there. It's interesting because we have many bits and pieces of the puzzle. But what we don't really see is how those bits and pieces form a kind of coherent whole, so that what we're lacking in a way is an explanation of how the brain integrates all of this activity that's ongoing, because there isn't a little conductor in there doing the integrating. It's somehow organized to be integrated, and it's that we don't yet really understand. Part of what all nervous systems, even very simple nervous systems, have to do is organize themselves so that the body moves in an adaptive way, so that it avoids predators, finds food, doesn't get too cold or too hot, and so forth. And as brains became more and more complicated, it's as though they built within themselves a kind of model, an inner model, a brain model of the outside world. And then these models could get more and more complex, allowing the animal to be more adaptive, to make longer range predictions, to expect things, to remember in greater detail, and so forth. And so in one sense, you can think of the brain as kind of mapping reality, and as it learns through experience to function in the external world, then that map, that inner brain map, becomes more closely coordinated with the outside world. In general, there is a strong connection, because if there isn't, then the animal gets confused and it gets eaten up by some other animal. But I think Mike Gazzaniga makes a very deep point here, and that is that the brain, in order to predict what's going on in the outside world, and in order then to be more efficient in finding food and avoiding predators, that what the brain does is it constructs a kind of model. And three-dimensionality is a very good example. So that by and large, of course, what happens to create within the brain this three-dimensional perception is that the signals from the two retinas are compared and depth is constructed. And by and large, that works very well. It allows us to see where things are relative to one another. And in the wild, it allows one animal to break camouflage and sort of see where the prey is. So three-dimensionality, by and large, in normal cases, works very well. But it's always possible, because this is a construction, to fool the brain. Now, we used to, as kids, play a game that was very similar to what Mike was doing, and that is you take two fingers like this, and you make them about that far, but look with your eyes well beyond the fingers. And what appears when you do that is a little fingertip floating between the two fingers. And what you're doing in a way is fooling that constructive capacity of the brain into making something that isn't really there. And we used to call those things floating sausages. And anybody can do it, and you don't need 3D goggles. But it shows you that, first of all, the brain is constructing, and that constructing models in the service of prediction about the outside world is a normal part of probably all vertebrate brains, maybe invertebrate brains. And that because it is a construction, it's always possible to fool the brain. But it doesn't happen very often. The brain is very good at not being fooled. I think that is a very, very important constructive capacity. So you really actually, excuse me, have hit on a very important aspect of the constructive capacity, and that's the capacity to imagine, to sort of create in the mind images that allow you to think about what would happen if you were to take one path rather than another, or to make one decision rather than another. And as you point out, this imaginative capacity can also be used to sort of overcome certain fears. So if I'm skiing and I come to a slope that is steeper than what I normally do, and I'm a little nervous about it, if I stand there and imagine myself making this movement and that movement and getting down successfully, it actually helps me when I then go ahead and go down that ski slope. Imagining yourself successfully going down the ski slope, or imagining yourself successfully making a golf swing. We don't know why that imaginative thing kind of works, but it's kind of like having a practice. It's like in golf, it's like having a practice swing. As you imagine yourself pulling your arms back and this lovely swing smoothly through. And it has a real effect on the subsequent behavior. But how exactly it does that, we're not sure. It has been known for a long time that imagining a practice, whether it's giving a speech or playing the piano or skiing down the slope, does have a positive effect. That it might actually affect the muscles is a very, very interesting development. And it may be that when we do the imaginative action in our minds, that there are small muscle effects that follow the imagining, and that this streamlines the coordination of the muscles so that you do actually perform better after imagining. The knowledge from neuroscience about the importance of having a social life, and having a social life where you care about others, is only one factor in social movements. And there are many other things involving, as you know, economics and politics and power. And so these things are very difficult to predict. But on the other hand, I do sometimes feel that the understanding that morality and what we value has a neurobiological platform, and that it is malleable and changeable as a result of experience and living in a group, can have a kind of moderating effect on people, such that perhaps their ideological fervor about certain things may be tempered and toned down. But that may just be sort of wishful thinking on my part. But I aim to try by explaining something about the deep nature of values and of social values and of the role of social values in well-being and happiness, to try to reach people and maybe to have a small effect. What I'm interested in is the neurobiological platform for sociality, for how it is that in mammals the brain is organized so that the parents, for example, care about the offspring, and they also care about one another, and this caring circle can be expanded, and in certain species it is expanded beyond the mother infant, beyond the mate attachment to others in the group, and sometimes even well beyond that. And we're learning about the neural circuitry that underlies this basic drive or motivation for sociality. Now, of course, in addition to that, there is the role of culture, which is extraordinarily powerful. But that, too, in a way, is a brain story, because what we think is that depending on the culture in which an animal is born, human or marmoset or baboon, they are going to learn the social practices of the group. And that really becomes intuitive after a while. It becomes second nature, that doing certain things this way is right and doing them that way is wrong. And so the capacity of the mammalian brain to learn, not just about the external world, but about the social practices of the group and about the individual characters within the group and how they behave and what they want and how they're likely to be in a certain condition, is all part of the evolution of the mammalian brain. So learning, and as we say sometimes, tuning up the reward system, that is, learning through pain and pleasure of approval, the pain of disapproval, is absolutely crucial for all social mammals in learning social practices. And it certainly is in humans as well. One of the discoveries, I think, within the last decade is concerns the capacity for brains at the adult stage to change themselves. Of course, everyone has known for a long, long time that infant brains and child brains and adolescent brains are really quite changeable. They're quite plastic, as we say, that through learning they reorganize and literally rewire themselves. But in recent years, it's become clear that adult brains are able to learn much more than we used to think. And that they are able sometimes to recover from brain damage in ways that are really very surprising. And so an interesting question really concerns sort of a resolve that one might have at 45 or at 50 to strike out in a new life, or to change one's ideas and ideologies perhaps in some fundamental way. And it seems to me quite clear that that's very possible. And what is needed really is motivation. Now, the cases where changing the brain is difficult is where the reward system has been altered, for example, by a drug. So I think addictions present very special kinds of difficulties concerning changing yourself. So nicotine, which we know now is terribly addictive and very lethal, presents a real challenge to smokers because it is so highly addictive, and having a resolve in the morning to quit smoking has to be accompanied by many other kinds of bits of support in order to make that work. But it can be done, even in the case of addictions.